Hello folks, what's the crack? Hugh here, and I hope you're doing really well. Welcome to Mental Health, the podcast where we discuss the latest tools, cutting-edge research, and ancient practices to help you take back control of your emotional well-being. Today's episode is the second half of our conversation, all about social connection and belonging during the pandemic. If you haven't checked out last week's episode, please pump the brakes. I'd highly recommend going back and listening to that one first to set the context for everything we talk about today, which is really some of the more practical side to community building in the age of social distancing. So the tools, the practices, the rhythms, and so on that we can deploy to make sure that this really essential part of our lives continues to be a source of joy, a source of meaning, and can just keep existing no matter what's going on with the virus, and really beyond into anything else that we as a species or as individuals may face over the next few years. So yeah, look, thanks so much for being here. I will now step back in time and fade into the wonderful, magical moment we left you last time. Dr. O'Lardy is there waiting for us to get back to him. He's no doubt in midstream of sharing some absolute golden nuggets. So please welcome back to your ears, Steve and Hugh from the past. Cheers.
I have to put this out there because you talked about ways in which the pandemic has introduced things into some people's lives that have taken them away from connection. So you talked about addiction, and absolutely, the toll of addiction, which we're going to talk about a couple episodes from now, has been staggering. And, addiction can be thought of in some ways as the opposite of connection. It certainly fills that void in a very empty calorie sort of way, but it does fill it. But the other thing that we've seen is a staggering toll of clinical depression. And the reason that's so important right now is because depression gives the brain a signal to pull away from everybody, to withdraw, and to cocoon inside our little dark hovel. And so, it's really tragic and a kind of a vicious spiral where the person becomes isolated, and that can lead to increasing depression, which then gives them an impulse to become even more isolated. And so part of what we're talking about today, I think, is an encouragement for folks, if they see themselves, if they recognize themselves in that picture, to resist that impulse, to slowly take steps outside of that dark cave, to reconnect, to reach out, because that signal coming from the depressed brain is a false, toxic signal. It's a lie that the brain is saying, you need to keep other people safe from you. You're going to infect them with your darkness, with your, basically the depressed brain says, you are ill and you're a social mammal, so don't be around anybody else because you might be of harm to them. And in depression, that's the last thing we ever want to listen to.
So let's stay there for a second, okay? Because I think there is two sides to the coin here. And I agree with you. And I've had similar experiences during the pandemic where it's given me incredible time with, for example, the baby that we had during lockdown, with my wife, with some of our closest friends. That's not everyone's experience. And you just, you talk about the depressed person there. You've obviously worked with hundreds, if not thousands of people who find themselves in that place. What are some of the first tiny steps that you encourage people to take to come out of that and to start either connecting maybe for the first time in a long time with new people or reconnecting with relationships that have kind of fallen by the wayside?
Yeah, I love the question. One of the things, this might surprise some people to hear it, but in talking to so many people who battle depression, when we have the conversation about, okay, it's going to be really therapeutic, really clinically helpful to reconnect. So let's make a list of the people before the depression got so bad. Who were the people that you were spending time with? Who were the people that were meaningful to you? Who were the people in your life that when you spent time with them, you felt better? You enjoyed the time. You felt better about yourself.
Dude, that's key.
And
that is so
yeah,
key. Tim Ferriss just put out a thing
yeah.
where he's like, the only New Year's like review he does is he goes through his calendar and has 2 columns, and it's like things that felt positive and things that felt negative, and one of them is relationships. And he says his goal is always in the new year to spend more time with the positive influences in his life, and I just think it's genius.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, in our therapeutic lifestyle protocol for depression that we developed with my research group, one of the things we talk about when we do this content on connection is we talk about, okay, well, yeah, you know what? There are some connections that are toxic. There are some people that make us, there are some people that, and how do you know if it's toxic? Well, you just ask yourself the question, do I feel better or do I feel worse when I'm spending time with this person?
Yep.
And obviously, every close relationship is going to have the occasional conflict or moment where it's not all wine and roses, but generally speaking. So yes, the toxic people in our lives, we generally either want to limit the time we spend with them or see if there's a way that we can work to improve the quality of that time to make it less toxic. But, okay. So back to the question of like, we're talking with someone who's got depression. We put it on their radar. Like who are the people that you used to find it rewarding to spend time with? And very often, you know what they would say, Hugh? They'd be like, yeah, I feel really guilty because that person was reaching out to me a lot when I started to fall down this black hole of depression. Yeah. And I blew them off.
Been there.
And every time they initiated, every time they said, hey, let's get together and, hang out or do the thing. And I would always either blow them off or sometimes, I ghosted them, God forbid. Mm-hmm. And so now it's like I burned that bridge and I'm sure that person hates me. And so that became a really incredible opportunity to validate, like, yeah, a lot of people don't understand about depression, that it, really makes us shut down and pull away. Yeah. And that fear is reasonable. But what we've found is that most of the time, if there's been somebody in your life that you've been pulling away from, if you reach back out to them and explain, like, God, I'm really sorry. I probably hurt your feelings when, you reached out and I blew you off, but dude, that was my depression. And I've been battling this horrible thing and I've been suffering and, stupidly, I've been suffering alone. And I'd love to have you back in my life if you'd be willing to try to reconnect. Now that's a hard conversation, but so worthwhile.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, really interesting to hear you say that because some of the things that I realize in talking to you and hearing about kind of your clinical practice is like so many other people who have been battling depression for, a decade plus, often intuitively you start to put practices in your own life that you mightn't know the research, but years later, a researcher comes along and they can say, oh yes, we actually have a label for this thing. It's called the blah, 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 blah principle. And you're like, oh, cool. Like I just kind of like intuitively did it because it worked for me. And a big shift that I made in my personal relationships. So I kind of like went on this deep, not wide journey. And I kind of had this thing where, okay, who are my 5 people? Like who are my 5 closest people on the planet? And that list hasn't changed for maybe 5 years, which is also interesting. And I just made the commitment that, okay, I'm going to have a weekly appointment. It sounds very businesslike and very cold and very callous. My wife hates the terminology, but for me, I just have to do it because it works. So I have a weekly reoccurring appointment with the closest people in my life. And it happens every single week. Sometimes it's only an hour. We're in Germany at the minute as a family, so it's an hour phone call. Other times it's like a longer hangout where we do something or we have them over at the house or whatever. But I used to blow those people off whenever I was going through a depressive episode, and the subtle shift to commit to that weekly appointment, almost as a form of accountability, was a real game changer for me. It was really painful. Mm-hmm. It was not comfortable in the slightest to kind of show the version of yourself that you want to hide away from the world, even from the people that you love the most. And it was a real kind of learning experience for both of us involved, kind of both sides. But it has been one of the most incredible experiences of my life to learn to be yourself, whether you're depressed or whether you're on top of the world or whether you're just kind of having an okayish kind of day with people, and for them not to run away the way that you maybe expect them to. And half the time they mightn't even notice, not in an insensitive way, but you're still enjoying each other's company. You're still enjoying being there, even if, you know, I'm not maybe bringing as much energy as I used to. So I think that's a really interesting tool for people to explore, is this idea of, maybe weekly is unrealistic for some relationships or some scenarios, but I just think the power of consistency is everything. Whether it's trying to get fit or trying to produce a podcast, it's choosing something and then sticking to it and just doing it for a long time. And well, you know, there's some relationships that we see monthly. There's even some relationships, old mentors of mine, that I would speak to quarterly. And again, it's in my Google Calendar on a repeating appointment basis, which sounds very businesslike and a bit cool, but it's what kind of gets it done for me and makes it possible.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. And I do, you know, there's something so powerful about habit, about just making something part of our routine. And, you know, when we're little, usually, I'd say for most of us, our deepest connections and friendships, they happen so organically, so spontaneously. We don't have to be terribly intentional about it most of the time.
Yeah.
We just, you know, we find, oh, hey, we love hanging out together. Let's just hang out more. And we have lots of time to do that and lots of space. Yeah. We're not, you know, so
you all go to the same school,
committed.
you play the same sport.
Yeah.
It's all kind of naturally. Yeah.
Yeah. It's everything is set up and handed to us on a platter to become at least have the opportunity to become very close to other people. And I mean, obviously some people don't have that experience, but I'd say the majority do. And as we get older and we go through life and we take on more responsibility, more commitment, we have to be more intentional. Now, I just want to put this out there. What I've found with my patients over the years, as they take an inventory and think about, okay, what if I want to schedule a regular time, maybe weekly, maybe every other week, whatever. Most people, by the way, most of the time, most people are flattered. They're pleased. They're like, oh, that's, you know, they respond really, really, really well, better than most people would expect they would. But we have to be aware of the fact that occasionally somebody will not respond well. And usually the response is like, yeah, okay, sure. You know, I'll have my people call your people and we'll, you know, we'll do lunch sometime. In other words, they're not going to come right out and say, yeah, you know what? I really don't care to spend time with you right now.
Or I just don't have the capacity to see you every single week, you know?
Yeah, exactly right. And so some people don't have the bandwidth. Some people are, and by the way, this is a lot of people now, having their own mental health struggles that are causing them to be shut down and causing them to have that horrible toxic voice in their head that's saying, you don't want to be around other people. They're just going to bring you down. No, wait, worse than that. You don't want to be around other people. You're going to bring them down. They don't want to see you. This person is only saying this to be nice. And so, you know, that's the depression talking very often. But for whatever reason, probably your mileage may vary, but probably about 1 out of every 3 or 4 people that you reach out to is not going to respond the way we would hope. And that's okay. You know, that'll give us a chance to maybe to be that friend for them that just doesn't get offended, that continues to say, hey, you know, this seems like a busy time for you right now, but I just want you to know, care about you. I'm here for you. And I'm going to keep reaching out on occasion.
Yeah, it's give and take, you know. If you're just a leech, like no one, they'll maybe give you like a month, you know, every single week. But if there's no give and take, then, what's the incentive? It has to be built on actual relationship, and relationship is it's being there for the other person as well. Now, there are seasons
Absolutely.
where you kind of carry each other. I notice this in marriage. I'm sure you've way more stories than I do where, there's some seasons where, your spouse is carrying you. There's other seasons where you're carrying your spouse. And then there's some seasons where outside forces have to carry both of you. But that's the tribe. That's the community. That is what humans were built for and built to do. And a little kind of, I'm not sure if it's exactly the appropriate place to share it, but a principle we have adopted in our own kind of social life is this idea that somebody has to go first. And we have taken it upon ourselves that we are always going to be those people. So for a while, we got really kind of self-righteous and full of self-pity where it's like, oh, like our friends never invite us over to their house for dinner. It's always us that are doing the inviting. And does it mean they don't care about us, or does it mean they don't love us, or whatever? And then we kind of just get to the conclusion where it's like, no, don't be silly. They're busy and trying to manage their own hectic schedules. And if you can go and at least throw the invitation out there for people and take that off their cognitive load and their cognitive schedule, you're actually doing a service to them. But also being prepared to be faced with a no, and being prepared to face rejection, and not taking it personally and not taking it too devastatingly whenever that happens. So we just don't, and I say we as a couple, but also just me in my own life, I just don't wait anymore for the other person to reach out, because I've already made the decision. No, it's me. I'm the one that has to reach out, and it's okay. I don't mind doing that, and that's just the way it works. It's not a perfect kind of scenario, but for me, it's far better than the alternative, which is two groups of people waiting for the other person to go and then nothing happening, or a month going by before you hang out again, and you're kind of thinking, oh, that's kind of waste of time. We could have been really going deeper and building this relationship even stronger with,
Yeah, you know what? That reminds me, last year I had a student in class that asked the question, said, hey, we're in the class was abnormal psych, and we're talking about clinical depression. And the student says, well, okay, so how can I be a better friend to the people in my life that are struggling with depression? And, just spur of the moment, I didn't take a lot of time with it, but I just said, a lot of people, when they are depressed, they are going to, when you reach out to them, when you initiate, they're not going to reciprocate. And our human nature is to have our feelings hurt, right? It kind of hurts when you take the initiative and somebody doesn't respond. And I said, you have to be able to step outside of that very human reaction and be the bigger person and get to the vantage point where you can say, okay, they're hurting right now. And in their pain, they are pulling away. And I'm going to be the bigger person that just says, you know what? And says to them, I get it. This is not a time when you really feel like being around somebody else, but I just want you to know I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to keep reaching out until you tell me that I can't anymore, because I care about you. And I know that you're hurting, and, just let me know how I can be a part of your life. And Hugh, I want to tell you, I had like literally 30 students email me after that lecture on both sides of the equation. People who were currently depressed, people who had been depressed, people who had others in their lives that they deeply cared about, that they were trying to be a better friend to. And they were like, that was life-changing advice, because I've never had that perspective before. And, I don't know, maybe someone in our audience needed to hear that today.
Super cool. I just love that you can always kind of tie it back to real world experience across a lot of people's lives. It's nice for me because, I only really have myself and maybe like, a couple of other people who have walked through mental health issues. And it's nice to kind of, again, like you joked earlier, like to be seen and say, oh, okay, this is like not a specific individual phenomenon. That's cool. Cool.
Well, you know what? Thank you, but I you've got a million stories, and I love hearing all of them. So I think that's a kind of a compliment. We're gonna have a mutual admiration society going on here, folks. So just bear with us.
And we're gonna have to edit out all of the love. It's like, oh my goodness, not again. These guys, come on, flip's sake.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's start to kind of maybe think about kind of like key takeaways, whether they're tools or practices that we can kind of leave with people, specifically on this idea of social connection, this idea of belonging, and bonus points if you can connect them also to during the pandemic. So yes, community in general, but also what you can do to kind of pandemic proof your social life. I go first because I've got a really simple one. I really hate video conferencing. Like, it is something that I don't know why it destroys my soul, like one little small screeny minute at a time. I don't know why it drains my energy so much. I feel so exhausted after a video conference. And so at the start of the pandemic, we were obviously all on Zoom and like doing quizzes together and whatever the kind of current trend or meme was with our friends. And then it just got to the point where I was just like so burnt out on video conferences, like I just can't do it. And I made the mistake of then just dropping connections with people instead of finding ways to make digital work for me. And it sounds really basic, but like the way that I found that works incredibly is just to do a walkie-talkie, like a walk and talk, where I put the headphones in.
Yep.
I have an appointment with somebody and I go on an amazing walk. They go on an amazing walk wherever they are. And I don't know, it's a bit like doing these episodes with you. I can kind of trick myself into feeling like I'm right there with the person. Whenever I don't see them, whenever it's just the audio, I find it to be incredibly intimate. And I love the benefit that you can kind of, to use a James Clear Atomic Habits kind of buzzword, you can habit stack it with something else, because you're not just sitting there on a chair watching the screen. It's like, you can do some chores, you can do some exercise, you can pretty much do anything that doesn't make too much noise. And that really, really has allowed me to, not only during the pandemic and during lockdowns, but also when I travel or when I'm visiting my wife's family in Germany, as I am now, we just pick up where we left off. And instead of going for a walk together in person, we just kind of do it digitally and do it remotely. There's obviously, I am like so guilty of this, of kind of having this mantra where it's like we need to throw all of our screens away and get back to basics. That's not fair, because there's actually amazing opportunities and tools that the digital world has provided to us that are really powerful if they're used correctly. And I think the kind of classic kind of framework there is just make sure you're using them as opposed to them using you.
Nice. Yeah. No, I really resonate with the idea of habit stacking. I haven't used that term before, but it's very evocative. So in our book, where we write about different ways of integrating therapeutic lifestyle, one of the things we talk about is like, hey, if you take a walk with a friend, whether it's in person or as you talk about, you've got somebody on your Bluetooth headset and you're having a phone conversation, you get, well, if you do it right, you get therapeutic sunlight exposure, you get therapeutic exercise, you get social connection, you get immersion in nature, you get anti-ruminative engagement. You get 5 for the price of 1. It's like, dude, it does not get any better than that. And yeah, I've been a big fan of the same sort of thing. Probably the best $50 I ever spent was on my Bluetooth headphones that, it's so freeing to be able to have that long form conversation with somebody that you care about. Maybe for me, one of my best friends is a philosophy professor. I know you're going to be shocked to hear that I love to talk about philosophy. He's in Central Coastal California, which is a long way away. And, I haven't seen him in person in over 2 years. Wow. But we've stayed really close. And, I think that's really helpful. There's no way I'm going to top that, by the way. But what I would say, one of the things that the pandemic has revealed is a foible, a quirk of human nature and the way our minds work, which is that for most people, It's exhausting to think in terms of nuance, to think in terms of shades of gray. We think when we're exhausted mentally, we think a lot in black and white terms. And so what have people done with safety during the pandemic? They've either gone to one extreme or the other. And so we all have that person, maybe many people in our lives who are what I would call sort of pandemic denialists, people that are just like, oh, it's overblown. It's just the flu. No big deal. I'm not going to change anything. Why are people making such a big deal? I'm going to have exactly the same social connections under exactly the same conditions. And we know that, for all kinds of reasons that's not ideal. And then there are the people that are on the other side. And I hope I'm not stepping on too many toes here, but I can tell you as a mental health professional, I get really concerned about people that are so concerned with optimizing safety that they forget about the fact that we optimize safety at a cost. And the cost is isolation. And again, we desperately need to be connected with other people. When we are isolated, it drives our circulating stress hormones through the roof. It interferes with our immune function. It interferes with the quality of our sleep. It exacts a physical health toll. It exacts a mental health toll. And so absolutely, we don't want to be afflicted with this horrible virus if we can avoid it. But we cannot design our lives for 100% safety from infection, because that's going to guarantee 100% affliction with other kinds of diseases of isolation. And so we have to think in terms of some nuance. We can't go black and white on this one. We just can't. And so I guess what I would put out there is, as a mental health professional, I would encourage each of us to think through, how can we thread the needle? How can we optimize the time that we spend face to face, if possible, with other people, but do it in a way that's relatively safe? We've already talked about the fact that outdoors is very safe, according to all the medical evidence. Obviously, when people meet and they're masked, they're very safe. When people meet and they're fully vaccinated, until Omicron came along, extremely safe. Now with Omicron, it's able to evade some of the immune defenses that we have from vaccination or from recent infection. We see people that were infected with Delta that are now getting Omicron. But usually in those cases, the infection is mild. Obviously, we don't want to be too sanguine about that. It can be worse, but usually not. And so, the calculus our family made over the Christmas holiday, we had 14 family members gathered together under one roof at the peak of the Omicron outbreak. What could possibly go wrong? What went wrong was 2 members of our coterie came down with COVID. How do we know? We had rapid testing. And so we took steps to mitigate the risk, and nobody else got it.
Nice.
And we're going to look back years from now, and it's like, that was kind of sucked in some ways to have Christmas morning marred by, oh, hey, guess what? I just tested positive for COVID. But I got to be so careful, Hugh, how I say this, but I'm just going to put it out there. We were all fully vaccinated and boosted, and nobody got really sick. And I would do it all over again. Mm-hmm. I would, because I'm weighing the risk and the reward, the cost and the benefit. We all took steps to keep ourselves safe. And then we said, you know what? Life is about managed risk. So every aspect of life. We don't stop driving because we know there's a chance we could get into a very serious accident, but we do wear seatbelts, and we do have airbags, and we do hopefully drive the speed limit and keep our tires inflated. And, we take all kinds of steps to try to minimize risk, but we don't eliminate it. And then we live our lives. And so I'm just going to put that out there. I would encourage listeners, within the scope of their own, whatever health challenges they might have. Obviously, if they have an autoimmune illness, then they're going to want to be a little more careful. maybe a lot more careful. If they're very old, they're going to need to be more careful. Why? Because that's the single biggest driver and predictor of serious response to this illness. But we all need to connect. None of us can afford to be isolated, because guess what? That can kill us as well.
I'm kind of going to build on that in a slightly different direction as well. Like, I really, really loved the analogy you used of driving and the seatbelt. I think that's just so spot on for so many different reasons. I think it also could be used in the sense of, you know, when you're engaging and interacting with people socially, especially people that you're close to, there's going to be some bumps along the way, and you can't mitigate pain from relationships either. You know, there's going to be disagreements, there's going to potentially be fallouts, there's going to be tough conversations that are needed to be had, and there are kind of seatbelts that you can put in place to make sure that you don't constantly like drive your relationships off the cliff. And, you know, I think part of this as well is working hard on becoming somebody that other people want to spend time with. And it might even sound a bit harsh, but like what that looks like in my own life is like just continuing to remove the obstacles that hold people back from connecting with me intimately, from like silly, simple things, maybe like personal hygiene, to how you dress, to, you know.
Did you say personal hygiene?
I did, yeah. But, you know, these are things that can be obstacles that hold people back, to even, you know, the more bigger, like more messy, complicated things like anger issues, or, you know, the way you respond to criticism or things like that. I think kind of the commitment to improving yourself and trying to shave off some of the rough edges that you maybe have in your personality will also just serve you in your quest to connect with the wider community, but also in the deeper connections as well.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And in fact, I know there are a lot of fans of Brene Brown out there. Her landmark book, The Gift of Vulnerability. One of the things that she said that really, really connected with me is that very often in our culture, at least in American culture, there's a fear of being vulnerable with other people, but that's an invitation to greater intimacy.
Wow.
When, you know, and so if we've always got our mask on, if we've always got this veneer, this facade of, oh yeah, I've got my stuff together, then it keeps people at arm's length. And so to the degree, and I'm kind of preaching to myself with this one, you know, to the degree that there's any potential that we might have to intimidate other people socially, taking steps into the realm of vulnerability, sharing, you know, appropriately, not TMI, but, you know, but appropriately, maybe a struggle or, you know, a concern, whatever it is, can be an invitation to let that other person into our inner world in a way that can really enhance the quality of that connection.
And that's the shift. You know, that word invitation you use is great. It's the shift, or how you shift a connection from the shallow to the deep. It is those risks. You know, it's those scary conversations. Yeah. It is that moment where you're like, should I show this part of myself or should I not? Or should I really tell them how my day went? Or should I just say, yeah, it was great, fine, no problem. So I think that's really key as well. One of the things that we did during the pandemic was we actually got really close with our neighbours, which is like a very anti-millennial thing to do. But we had some really good weather during one of the lockdowns, and, you know, everybody decided to cut their grass like every single day because they had nothing else to do at one point. And, you know, we just moved into a new neighbourhood, and in some ways it's because of the pandemic that we actually know our neighbours and get on with them really well. And you'll love this. We went from kind of sitting in each other's gardens, you know, chatting, having a few beers or whatever it is, to then as winter approached and we weren't able to do that anymore, and we were kind of like, okay, you know, the dark Irish winter is upon us here. What can we do? There's a group of us that have actually committed to doing a weekly run, like once a week, every Monday night. And it's just just great because, you know, it's pandemic proof. You can pretty much do that all the time. We go somewhere in a lovely kind of lake near our house. It's just like a 10-minute drive. That's Ireland for you. There's just gorgeous stuff like that everywhere. And we do like a really short, embarrassing, slow, like 20 to 30-minute run. And then we kind of just hang out and talk afterwards. And, you know, that's great. I think like before the pandemic, or a better way to say it is what the pandemic has really shown me is that it's good to start with kind of what you have right in front of you, like the people on your doorstep or the people inside your own home. You know, like I've heard some friends and families like just kind of being like, oh yeah, like that brother that I just never hang out with or never talk to, like I now have the opportunity to actually build a relationship with them, or the roommate that you're kind of, you know, ships passing through the night because you both work in these crazy 60-hour jobs in a big city. It's like, okay, well actually maybe here's an opportunity to invest in the relationships that are right in front of me and right beside me. But yeah, those are just
Absolutely.
some of my things,
Yeah.
other than, you know, slay the social media and Netflix dragon and take control of your time. But that's probably for another day.
We're going to circle back around to that one at some point, no doubt. Yeah, no, that's a great example. And I think it just speaks to these basic principles that sound so ridiculously commonsensical, but they're nevertheless really profound, which is like, we're going to get close to people that we spend time with in shared activity and shared conversation around shared interest, shared passion, shared meaning. Those are the keys, really, to deepening connection. Spend time. And, you know, during a pandemic, that's going to mean very often spending time with the people, like, as you said it so eloquently, people that are right on our doorstep, and also taking the initiative to, if it means driving across town, if it means driving to another town, if it means hopping on a flight, which I've done several times during the pandemic. And that's back to the idea of managed risk. Was it worth it to me? Absolutely. For me, getting back in the classroom, managed risk. I had students sitting in a 250-seat lecture hall who I know were battling COVID. And how do I know? Because they told me. And
What the heck, man? Wait, what? I mean, I am very like, I'm really like pretty far along like the risk spectrum. Like, you know, I
risk tolerance.
Yeah, risk tolerance. Yeah, but what?
No. Let me clarify, because I don't want you to think that my students are psychopaths. They're not. They emailed me usually the next day and said, "Oh yeah, I just tested positive for COVID." You know, I was the one coughing yesterday.
Makes sense.
Like, what could possibly go? One of my two graduate student teaching assistants both begged me to not make them show up. You know, because when I'm lecturing, I'm not noticing so much who's coughing or sneezing or whatever. You know, I'm just doing my thing.
Yeah.
And interacting and, you know, putting them, I mean, I'm getting within 2 feet of my students. Now we're all wearing masks, but still my graduate students are like, did you hear all the people coughing during the lecture? And I'm like, no, I was in the zone.
The flow state. Just
the flow
turns
state,
down your senses. You're elevated, bro. I get it.
So anyway, you know, I mean, it sounds crazy, but like, would I do it again? Yeah. Am I going to do it again in 2 weeks when we get back to our next semester? Yeah, I'm going to do it again. Why? Because, you know, I'm going to do everything I can to minimize risk. But at the end of the day, I want to be there for my students. I want to be there. Just like, you know, you're saying you want to be there for the people that matter to you. So you do what you can, and then you make a decision. And now as we move out of the pandemic, it's not going to be as much of an issue, but I hope that all of us keep in mind the same sense of, look, if I was willing to go to these steps to stay connected when there were these potentially, you know, life and death stakes involved,
or just incredibly inconvenient.
Yes, all of that. Yes. If I was willing to mask up and willing to, you know, shiver out in the cold on my back deck under a lame little space heater, then surely I'm willing to pick up the phone or text and you know, be the one, like you said, who's willing to always take the initiative, or at least most of the time, you know, to be the one to take a little step of vulnerability, to be the one who risks being turned down or rejected, because it's so worth it.
Totally. I mean, so much of my podcasting core is telling me that this is the perfect place to end and kind of roll the intro. But I know we talked about it kind of off mic. I do think it would be amazing just to circle back once more and kind of speak directly to the person who is lonely, is isolated, is feeling completely cut off from any sense of community.
Yeah.
Whether it's through some sort of mental health thing going on, like anxiety or depression, or just the situation and the scenario that they find themselves in their lives. What are some kind of real bullet pointy jumping off points we can leave people with of how to actually make connections in the first place? I know that's like, we could spend 10 hours talking about this, but I just feel like I don't want to leave those people hanging,
So much to say about that. There are a lot of people right now this far into the pandemic that are very isolated, that feel very disconnected, disaffected. And so what do? Well, there. First of all, we have to acknowledge there's no one size fits all solution. There really isn't. What works for one person is not going to work for the next, and vice versa. But some basic principles. Number one, if somebody is alone and shut down because of a struggle with their mental health, it might be the case that the first thing they can do is to connect with a compassionate, trained professional. Now, you might think, well, wait a minute. So, Steve, are you saying basically I'm going to hire somebody to be my friend? My therapist is going to be my, like a hired gun is going to be my social connection for, it's like, yeah, absolutely. Damn right. Because for many of us, when we are deep in that vortex of mental illness, we're going to need a skilled professional to help us find the path back to wholeness, back to wellness, and to be at a place where we're even capable of taking the initiative to reach out, to make other connections. So I don't want to gloss over the fact that some of our listeners probably will benefit from initiating psychotherapy, either individually or, hey, how about on a group level? And a lot of the best experiences that I've ever had as a psychotherapist have been leading therapy groups where people have a natural affinity for others that are going through a very similar struggle and battle. And the connections that are made in those therapy groups can often last a lifetime. So there's that. Next, I want to encourage everyone to think about, okay, what are the things that I care about the most? What are the activities that I enjoy the most? What are the interests that I, that really spark my passion? What do I care about? Because those are the natural ways in which we can leverage those interests, those passions to find other fellow travelers, kindred spirits that share them. Fandom, I mean, that's easy and that's obvious, but you talked about like a running group, right? A hiking group for those who enjoy that. People who want to be out in nature. Lots of different social groups that are centered around that.
In Ireland, low hanging fruit is like the early morning sea swimming groups. You want to wake up at 6 and jump in freezing cold water. It's like there's a group for that.
Now, as a trained professional, I will tell you our technical term for those people is crazy people. But sure, if that
count me among them. I'm a fan.
Okay, yeah.
I'm a fan.
I'm a great admirer from a distance of that particular activity. People that I gotta put this out there. Okay, so we have this organization founded. Well, I don't know, founded. That's probably not right. Promoted by one of our best ex-presidents. And what I mean by that is not a political statement, but have you heard of Jimmy Carter?
Yeah.
Who famously became deeply involved with an organization called Habitat for Humanity, bringing people together in communities, basically, to build houses for the homeless and for those who could otherwise not afford them, the working poor often. Incredible agency. And so I had a patient, severely depressed some years ago. I think I write about it in my book, actually, who told me, we started talking about the importance of social connection. And she said, you know what? I'm not in a space right now where I can reach out yet to the people that I've dropped from my life in my depression. But I hear you. I need to be around other people. And before I got depressed, I had joined this Habitat for Humanity thing, but I had never had a chance to actually go out on site. So she agreed that week to go and contact Habitat again and to schedule a time that next weekend to go out with the team. Spent about 6 hours hammering 2x4, long studs and planks. And she said just the physical presence of working with other people that I know share my values, that we're all pulling together, we're part of a team. She said, it shocked me how much that meant to me, how connected I felt with a knowing glance, with just a word of greeting, with, just the fact that we were all there, all in together. And that became a catalyst for her to give her the confidence and the momentum to begin taking further steps, to reach out to some of the people that she met there to say, hey, would you be willing to get together for a coffee to talk about, X, Y, or Z? So, what's the point? Well, volunteering and service is such a powerful way of getting outside of ourselves, getting outside of our own suffering. When we're isolated, when we're hurting, we tend to be very self-absorbed. And that sounds like a critique. It sounds like a judgment. It sounds kind of harsh. I don't mean it to be. It's a very neutral observation. That's just how pain works. But when we think about how we can be of service to others, even while we're fighting our own battles, it gives us a much, much deeper sense of well-being and connection that can then be the catalyst for reaching out in other ways that can increase intimacy.
I love that. I feel inadequate to say anything else on top of that. I love it so much. Mine are just I just have some very practical tools.
We need those. Yeah, we need some really just practical, grounded sorts of advice as well.
Okay, so first one it's a website called Meetup. And it does exactly what it says on the tin. I mean, there are meetup groups for just about anything under the planet, whether it's basketball or specialty coffee or yoga or like those people that do handstands in the park. I don't know what that group would be called, but I'm sure you can find it. It's just a really interesting place where different fans or different people passionate around a very, very niche specific activity can come together, and they are intentionally designed to be open to the public. They're a great way to meet people. I've been to a few climbing meetups and basketball meetups, and I had a great time and thought it was super fun. Usually the people that go to these types of meetups are people who want to connect with other people, and they do it because they want to kind of offer a place in their communities to connect with people who are new to the city. I used to use Meetup whenever I would go traveling, just to kind of plug into somewhere new whenever I was going. I mean, basketball is also a great kind of tool to have in your tool belt because you can just go to a pickup game and kind of experience the same thing. Second tool I'll mention to people is it's an online platform called Nextdoor. I don't know how big it is. Have you heard of Nextdoor, Steve?
I've heard of it.
Yeah, so it's kind of, think of a online network for your neighborhood. So they're actually way bigger than you think they are, and all over the world, like huge in the States, huge in Ireland. And basically you sign on and you kind of enter in your postcode, or I think you guys say zip code, and it will show you a map of your local area of everyone else who's on Nextdoor. And I think you see their first name and maybe you can send them a message. But there's also a shared kind of news feed for your specific neighborhood, and it can get really niche. It can be like a 1 mile radius of where you live down to maybe your village or your city, or you can kind of zoom out. And that's a really interesting way to meet people, because again, they are neighborly people who are on a platform because they want to connect with people in their local area. They want to invite people for dinner when they're allowed to. They want to do little kind of meetups in the park. So it's also an interesting tool. And the last thing that I'll kind of mention is tying back to something that you said and something that I also mentioned earlier, is I just really embraced remote therapy during the pandemic. And actually, they are like, my therapist is one of the people that I do a walk and talk with. So they were open to not having video and just kind of doing the voice only calls. And it really, really works for me. And so, just kind of put that on people's radar, and maybe we can get into it at another time as well. But yeah, that's it. Those are my kind of 3 tools, the practical places to go. And I just really want to like beat a dead horse at this stage and come back once again just to say, like, somebody has to go first. Like, just make the decision to make that person be you. Take the initiative, be prepared for the rejection. It's not personal. People don't hate you. They have their own lives. They have their own stuff going on. But I'm a big believer, as Granny always said, who's probably plagiarizing some major world religion. If you don't ask, you don't get. And I think it's a helpful kind of mantra to have in your head.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, ask and you shall receive.
Oh,
you have not because you ask not. I do think this has been around for a while.
You mean my granny didn't write those words? Crazy. I'm gonna have to have a walk and talk with her and give her a good telling off.
Oh, you know what, Granny is such a treasure trove of mental health wisdom that I think we just need to cherish our grannies. And I'm not kidding. I've had so many people read my book and say, my granny told me a lot of this stuff and I didn't listen.
It's funny, before you and I met, one of the books that I really wanted to write, and hey, maybe I will still write it. Maybe we'll even write it together. But the title was Granny Was Right, because there's just so many times in my life, whether it's like physical health, mental health, like relationship advice, like household advice, I'm just like, my goodness, flip's sake, not again, Granny, come on. So, hey, if you want to hear an episode about grannies, reach out. mentalhealth.fm is the website. It's also where you can see a list of all of our other episodes. It's where you can send us voice messages. You can send us voice questions. We'd love to do a Q&A episode down the line if you are interested in that. Also, we'd just love to connect with you. We'd love just to hear like where you are in the world, how you came across this podcast, what you like about it, if there's anything we can do to make your listening experience any better. Genuinely, like Steve and I are just at the start of this kind of podcast journey, and we're having a blast, but we're ultimately here to serve you and equip you with the tools to help you take back, control of your mental health. I think that's something that we say at the top of the show. So, we are here to serve, and we're here to equip you and do what we can to help you move forward in whatever journey you find yourself walking on. So yeah, look, I'm happy to wrap up there, Steve, unless there's anything else.
No, it's beautiful.
Awesome.
That was so beautifully put. There's absolutely nothing I can add.
We need a soundboard every time we have like so much affirmation for each other. We're just breaking down male stereotypes here. We are on an important mission of encouraging each other. I'm going to receive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I love it. Okay. So you know what? I think, my friend, that is a wrap.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for your time, and look forward to touching base with you again soon, man. Cheers.
Cheers.